How far will you go for your child? I was standing in the parking lot of Sunshine Academy Preschool at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday when my 4-year-old daughter Lily walked out with a handprint bruise on her arm that hadn't been there that morning. The mark was dark purple, adult-sized, with clear finger impressions pressed into her pale skin. Miss Deborah, the lead teacher who'd been gushing about Lily's finger painting skills 30 seconds earlier, went completely silent when I pointed at my daughter's arm. Her smile didn't just fade, it died. She looked at the bruise, then at me, then back at the bruise, and said the sentence that would change everything. "Oh, that must have happened at home." I'd been dropping Lily off at Sunshine Academy for 8 months, ever since returning to work as a software engineer after my maternity leave extension ran out. The preschool had stellar reviews, a bright facility, and teachers who seemed genuinely caring. My husband David and I had toured 5 different places before choosing this one. Lily had loved it immediately, running to the play kitchen on our first visit and pretending to make us breakfast. Miss Deborah, who'd been teaching preschool for 12 years according to the staff bio on the wall, had reassured us that separation anxiety was normal and Lily would adjust beautifully. She had been right. Within 2 weeks, Lily was practically pulling me toward the classroom every morning. But standing there in the parking lot, looking at that handprint, I felt my stomach drop in a way I'd never experienced. This wasn't a bump from playing. This wasn't an accident. Someone had grabbed my daughter hard enough to leave a mark that looked like it hurt just to see. "She's been here all day," I said carefully, keeping my voice level even though my hands were starting to shake. "I dropped her off at 8:15 this morning. She didn't have any marks on her arms then." Miss Deborah's expression shifted into what I can only describe as defensive concern, the kind of fake worry that doesn't reach the eyes. "Well, children play rough sometimes. Maybe another student grabbed her during playtime. You know how kids can be." "This is an adult handprint," I said, gently turning Lily's arm to show the clear size of the fingers. My daughter stood quietly next to me, clutching her artwork folder, not saying anything. That silence felt wrong. Lily was never quiet. She narrated everything, asked 1,000 questions, sang constantly. Her quietness right now was a neon warning sign. Miss Deborah took a small step backward. "I really don't know what to tell you, Mrs. O'Connor. I didn't see anything happen today. Perhaps you should check with your husband about what happened this morning before she came to school." The implication was clear and infuriating. She was suggesting David or I had hurt our daughter. I felt heat rising in my face but forced myself to stay calm. "I need to speak with the director. Now." The director, a woman named Patricia Vance who'd run Sunshine Academy for 9 years, met me in her office 5 minutes later. She listened to my explanation while examining Lily's arm with an expression I couldn't read, professional neutrality maybe, or practiced detachment. "Mrs. O'Connor, I understand you're concerned, and rightfully so," Patricia began, folding her hands on her desk. "However, I've reviewed the incident reports from today, and there's nothing documented about any physical altercation or accident involving Lily. Our staff is required to report and document any injuries that occur on premises." "Then someone didn't report this," I said, keeping my daughter close to my side. "Because this happened today, here, while she was in your care." Patricia's professional smile tightened. "I can assure you that our staff takes documentation very seriously. If there's no report, it's because nothing happened here. Children can be quite active at home in the mornings before school. Perhaps she bumped into furniture, or maybe there was an incident you're not aware of." I stared at her, processing what was happening. They were closing ranks, protecting themselves, suggesting, without quite saying it directly, that I or my husband had hurt our daughter and were now trying to blame them. "Yeah, I'm going to take Lily to her pediatrician to have this documented," I said, standing up. "And I'm filing a formal complaint about this incident. My daughter was injured in your facility today, and instead of trying to figure out what happened, you're accusing her parents." Patricia's expression hardened. "Mrs. O'Connor, I hope you'll think carefully before making accusations that could damage this school's reputation. We've been serving this community for nearly a decade with a spotless record." I left without responding, buckled Lily into her car seat, and drove straight to our pediatrician's office. Dr. Angela Brenner had been Lily's doctor since birth, a no-nonsense woman with 23 years of experience who'd guided us through colic, ear infections, and every childhood milestone. I called from the car and her nurse worked us in as an emergency appointment. Dr. Brenner examined the bruise carefully, measured it, photographed it from multiple angles, and asked Lily gentle questions about how she got it. My daughter, normally so chatty, barely responded. She said she didn't remember. She said she didn't know. She kept looking down at her shoes. "This is absolutely a grab mark," Dr. Brenner said quietly, pulling me aside while her nurse gave Lily a sticker. "An adult hand, significant force. This is the kind of bruising that comes from someone restraining a child aggressively. I'm required to document this as suspected child abuse." My throat tightened. "I didn't do this. My husband didn't do this. It happened at her preschool today." "I believe you," Dr. Brenner said, and I could have cried with relief. "But I still have to report it to Child Protective Services. It's mandatory. They'll investigate, and hopefully that investigation will reveal what actually happened." She filed the report while I sat in the examination room with Lily, who was now drawing on the paper covering the exam table with crayons the nurse had given her. She drew our house, our dog, stick figures of our family, normal 4-year-old art. But she still wasn't talking, and that wrongness kept growing in my chest. That evening, I examined Lily's entire body while giving her a bath. No other marks, no other bruises, just that one handprint on her right forearm. David stood in the bathroom doorway, his face pale with barely controlled rage. "Someone grabbed our daughter hard enough to bruise her," he said, voice tight, "and the school is covering it up." "We need to figure out who," I said, "and we need to make sure it never happens again." I stayed up until 2 a.m. that night, searching for information about preschool abuse cases, reading parent forums, trying to understand what we were dealing with. What I found was disturbing. Story after story of parents discovering their children had been hurt at daycare or preschool, of schools denying responsibility, of investigations that went nowhere because there were no witnesses except young children who couldn't or wouldn't articulate what happened. The next morning, I kept Lily home from school and called Patricia Vance to inform her. Her response was cool and professional. "That's certainly your choice, Mrs. O'Connor. I hope you'll reconsider once you've had time to calm down and think rationally about this situation." Calm down, think rationally, code for stop making trouble. I called David at work and told him what Patricia had said. He was quiet for a long moment, then, "I'm going to install a camera in Lily's backpack. One of those nanny cam things. We need to know what's happening in that classroom." "That might be illegal," I said, already Googling Maryland recording laws. "I don't care," David said flatly. "If someone's hurting our daughter and the school won't protect her, I'm not going to sit back and do nothing." Maryland is a 2-party consent state for audio recording, but video without audio is legal. We ordered a small camera designed to look like a button, mounted it on Lily's backpack with a clear view of whatever was in front of her, and tested it thoroughly. The battery lasted about 6 hours, and the video quality was surprisingly good. On Monday morning, I dressed Lily for school with the camera-equipped backpack and drove her to Sunshine Academy. My hands were shaking as I walked her to her classroom. Miss Deborah greeted us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lily, we missed you Friday. Feeling better?" I nodded politely, helped Lily hang up her backpack on her assigned hook with the camera facing outward toward the classroom, kissed her goodbye, and left. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, trying not to throw up from anxiety about what we might discover. The first day of footage showed nothing suspicious. Lily's backpack hung on the hook most of the day, giving us a view of the classroom cubbies and part of the play area. We could see children playing, teachers moving around, normal preschool activities. No audio meant we couldn't hear what was being said, but visually, everything looked fine. The second day was similar. So was the third. I started to wonder if we were wrong, if maybe the bruise had been a one-time accident that the teacher genuinely hadn't seen. Maybe another child had grabbed Lily during a conflict over a toy. Maybe this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Then came Thursday, day 5 of recording. I was at work reviewing code for a new software release when my phone buzzed with a text from David. "You need to see today's footage, now." I left work early, claiming a family emergency, and met David at home. He had his laptop open on the kitchen table, the video queued up to a specific timestamp, 2:17 p.m. "Watch," he said, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. On the screen, Lily's backpack was on its hook, giving us a clear view of the classroom. Most of the children were sitting at tables doing an art project, but in the corner of the frame, near the bathroom hallway, I could see Miss Deborah crouched down at Lily's level. They were partially hidden behind a bookshelf, but the camera angle caught them clearly. Miss Deborah was holding Lily's arms tightly, shaking her slightly while clearly saying something intense and angry. Lily's face was crumpled up like she was trying not to cry. The teacher shook her again, harder, and I could see the exact moment when those adult fingers pressed into my daughter's small arm, creating the bruise that had started this nightmare. Then Miss Deborah seemed to compose herself, smoothed Lily's hair, and walked her back to the art table like nothing had happened. Lily sat down quietly and didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the recorded session. I watched the footage 3 times, my hands shaking harder each viewing. David had to leave the room during the second replay. When he came back, his eyes were red. "We need to go to the police," I said. "This is assault. This is child abuse. We have video evidence." We went to the police station that evening and asked to file a report. The officer at the desk, a young man who looked barely old enough to be out of the academy himself, listened to our story with an expression of mild interest that shifted to skepticism when we explained about the hidden camera. "So you recorded inside a preschool without their knowledge or consent?" he asked. "We recorded our daughter's classroom to find out who was hurting her," David said. "The school refused to investigate. We had no other option." The officer made some notes and said a detective would contact us. We left the police station feeling unsettled. That hadn't gone the way I'd expected. I'd thought they'd immediately arrest Miss Deborah. Instead, they'd seemed more concerned about our recording methods than the abuse on the video. Detective Kevin Landry called me 2 days later. He'd been with the department for 14 years, specializing in crimes against children, and his voice on the phone was professional but warm. Mrs. O'Connor, I've reviewed your report and the video footage you submitted. I'd like to meet with you and your husband to discuss the next steps. We met Detective Landry at the police station that afternoon. He was mid-40s with graying hair and tired eyes that suggested he'd seen too much. He watched the video footage carefully, his expression growing darker with each viewing. This is clear physical abuse, he said finally. The teacher is restraining your daughter aggressively and appears to be verbally berating her as well. The problem we have is the method of recording. Is it admissible? I asked. That's going to be up to the prosecutor and eventually a judge, Detective Landry said. Maryland law allows video recording without consent in certain circumstances, but there are privacy considerations when it comes to recording in schools where other children might be captured on camera. The defense will argue this violated privacy laws. So the teacher who abused my daughter might walk free because we documented the abuse? David's voice was rising. I'm not saying that, Detective Landry said calmly. I'm explaining the challenges. Here's what I can do. I can interview the teacher, interview other staff at the school, and interview your daughter. If we can build a case without relying solely on the video, that strengthens our position significantly. Lily won't talk about it, I said. We've tried. She shuts down completely when we ask what happened at school. That's common with young victims, Detective Landry said. They're often scared of the abuser and afraid of getting in trouble. I'm going to request a forensic interview with a trained child specialist. It's less intimidating than a police interview, and they're skilled at helping children open up. The forensic interview was scheduled for the following week at the Child Advocacy Center, a child-friendly facility designed specifically for interviewing young victims. The interviewer, Dr. Samantha Reyes, had 15 years of experience conducting forensic interviews with children ages 3 to 17. David and I sat in an observation room, watching through a one-way mirror as Dr. Reyes sat with Lily in a colorful playroom. She didn't ask direct questions at first, just played with Lily, built rapport, let our daughter relax. After about 20 minutes, she gently guided the conversation toward school. Do you like your teachers at Sunshine Academy? Dr. Reyes asked. Lily nodded but didn't elaborate. Is there a teacher you like the best? Lily named the assistant teacher, Miss Caroline. What about Miss Deborah? Do you like her? Lily's whole body tensed. She stopped playing with the blocks she'd been stacking. It's okay, sweetie, Dr. Reyes said gently. You're safe here. No one can get mad at you for telling the truth. And then, haltingly, quietly, Lily started to talk. She said Miss Deborah got very angry sometimes when kids didn't listen fast enough. She said the teacher would grab children by their arms and squeeze hard, then tell them not to tell their parents or they'd be in big trouble. She said Miss Deborah had a mean face that scared all the kids. She said some children had been put in timeout closets for being too loud. I watched through the mirror, tears streaming down my face, as my 4-year-old daughter described systematic abuse and intimidation. David had his hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking. Dr. Reyes was phenomenally skilled, never leading Lily, just letting her share at her own pace. The interview lasted 45 minutes. When it was over, Dr. Reyes came to speak with us while a staff member played with Lily in another room. What your daughter described is consistent with an abusive environment, Dr. Reyes said. The pattern of physical intimidation, the threats to keep children silent, the use of isolation as punishment, these are all red flags. I'll be providing my findings to Detective Landry and Child Protective Services. Detective Landry moved quickly after receiving Dr. Reyes's report. He interviewed Miss Caroline, the assistant teacher, who confirmed that Miss Deborah had a strict discipline style that sometimes made her uncomfortable, but she'd never actually witnessed physical abuse. He interviewed 3 other parents whose children were in the same classroom. 2 of them reported their children had come home with bruises but believed the school's explanation that it was from rough play. One mother, a woman named Julia Fontaine, told Detective Landry that her son had started having nightmares about school and begging not to go back, but she'd thought it was just a phase. When the detective described what we'd discovered, she broke down crying and said she felt like she'd failed to protect her own child. Armed with Lily's forensic interview, statements from other parents, and the video evidence, Detective Landry presented the case to the state's attorney's office. Assistant State's Attorney Monica Delgado, who specialized in child abuse prosecutions with 11 years of experience, agreed to file charges. On a Friday morning, 3 weeks after I'd first noticed that bruise, police arrested Miss Deborah Cunningham at Sunshine Academy. They escorted her out of the building in handcuffs while children watched, while parents picked up their kids early in a panic, while local news cameras captured everything. The charges were serious: 4 counts of child abuse, 3 counts of second-degree assault, and 2 counts of reckless endangerment. If convicted on all counts, she faced up to 25 years in prison. Patricia Vance, the director who'd implied I was a hysterical mother making false accusations, released a statement expressing shock and promising full cooperation with the investigation. The statement made my blood boil. She'd had a chance to investigate when I first reported the bruise. Instead, she'd protected her employee and tried to discredit me. I wasn't going to let that stand. I contacted an attorney named Russell Abrams, who specialized in civil suits against institutions. He'd been practicing for 19 years and had won multiple cases against schools and daycares for negligent supervision. When I showed him the documentation, the video footage, Dr. Reyes's report, and Detective Landry's case file, His eyes lit up in the way of someone who recognizes an airtight case. "You have everything we need to sue not just the teacher, but the school itself for negligence," Russell said. "They failed to properly supervise. They failed to investigate your complaint. They attempted to cover up the abuse, and they have a pattern of ignoring warning signs. This is institutional failure that enabled ongoing abuse." We filed a civil lawsuit against Sunshine Academy, Patricia Vance personally, and Miss Deborah, seeking damages for emotional distress, medical expenses, and punitive damages to send a message. The lawsuit detailed everything: the bruise, the school's dismissive response, the hidden camera investigation, Lily's forensic interview, and the discovery of a pattern of abuse affecting multiple children. The local media picked up the story. News outlets ran segments about the preschool abuse scandal, with my permission to use Lily's story anonymously as Child A. Parent advocacy groups amplified the coverage. State legislators started asking questions about oversight of childcare facilities. Within a week, Sunshine Academy's enrollment had dropped by 60%. Parents pulled their children out in droves, posting angry reviews online, sharing their own stories of bruises and behavior changes they'd dismissed or been told were normal. The pattern became undeniable. Miss Deborah had been abusing children for months, possibly years, and the school had either ignored it or actively covered it up. Patricia Vance resigned under pressure from the board of directors. 2 other teachers came forward with complaints they'd previously filed about Miss Deborah's aggressive behavior with children, complaints that had been dismissed or buried by administration. The State Department of Education launched a formal investigation into the school's licensing and oversight practices. Miss Deborah's trial began 4 months after her arrest. I sat in the courtroom every single day, watching prosecutors present the case against her. Monica Delgado was methodical and devastating, calling witness after witness. Dr. Brenner testified about the bruise. Dr. Reyes described Lily's forensic interview. Detective Landry explained the investigation. Julia Fontaine and 2 other mothers testified about their children's unexplained bruises and behavioral changes. And then came the video, played on a large screen for the jury, showing Miss Deborah grabbing Lily, shaking her, creating the bruise that had started this entire cascade. The defense attorney tried to argue it was taken illegally and should be excluded, but the judge ruled that parents have a right to protect their children, and the video was admissible as evidence of a crime in progress. Miss Deborah's defense was weak. Her attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated teacher who'd been overwhelmed and had one bad moment, but the pattern of abuse documented by multiple victims destroyed that narrative. She took the stand in her own defense, which was a mistake. Under cross-examination, she became defensive and angry, the same anger visible in the video when she'd grabbed Lily. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Miss Deborah showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, just stared straight ahead. Sentencing was set for 3 weeks later. During those 3 weeks, our civil case moved forward. Russell Abrams deposed Patricia Vance, who admitted under oath that she'd received complaints about Miss Deborah's discipline methods from at least 3 different parents over the past 18 months, but had classified them as personality conflicts, rather than abuse concerns. She'd never documented the complaints formally or investigated them seriously. The school's insurance company saw the writing on the wall and pushed hard for settlement. They offered $450,000 to avoid a trial that would expose even more institutional failures and likely result in a much larger judgment. Russell advised us to accept. The money would go into a trust for Lily's future therapy and education. We accepted the settlement with one additional condition. Sunshine Academy would be required to implement comprehensive child safety protocols, including surveillance cameras in all classrooms, mandatory abuse reporting training for all staff, and quarterly third-party safety audits. The school board, desperate to avoid bankruptcy and closure, agreed. Miss Deborah's sentencing hearing was packed with victim families. The judge allowed impact statements before sentencing. I went first, describing the terror of seeing that bruise on my daughter's arm, the nightmare of discovering systematic abuse, the ongoing trauma Lily faced. She still had nightmares. She was terrified of female teachers. She flinched when anyone raised their voice. Julia Fontaine spoke about her son's regression, how he'd started wetting the bed again after being potty trained for a year. Another mother described her daughter's night terrors and separation anxiety. The impact statements lasted nearly 2 hours. When it was time for sentencing, the judge addressed Miss Deborah directly. She spoke about the sacred trust placed in teachers, especially those who work with young children. She said Miss Deborah had violated that trust in the most fundamental way, using her position of authority to intimidate and abuse the vulnerable children in her care. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison, to be served consecutively on the multiple counts. With good behavior, she might be eligible for parole in 10 years, but she'd lost her teaching license permanently, would have to register as a child offender, and would never be allowed to work with children again. As they led Miss Deborah away, she looked back at the courtroom. Her eyes found mine for just a second. I didn't look away. I wanted her to see that the mother she'd dismissed, the child she'd abused, had brought her entire world crashing down. Life returned to a new normal slowly. Lily started therapy with a child psychologist named Dr. Ian Fletcher, who specialized in trauma recovery for young children. He'd been practicing for 26 years and had helped hundreds of abuse survivors. With his guidance, Lily began to process what had happened to her. The nightmares decreased. Her fear of teachers softened when we found a small, nurturing preschool with transparent policies and security cameras in every classroom. 6 months after Miss Deborah's sentencing, I got a call from Detective Landry. He'd been contacted by parents in 3 other states where Miss Deborah had previously worked. She'd left teaching positions abruptly at schools in Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. In each case, there had been whispered complaints about her discipline methods, but nothing formal, nothing that prevented her from getting hired elsewhere. The investigation expanded. More victims came forward. The pattern of abuse spanned nearly a decade. Detective Landry estimated Miss Deborah had potentially abused dozens of children across 4 states. Additional charges were filed in Virginia, where the statute of limitations hadn't expired on some of the older cases. A year after finding that first bruise, I was interviewed for a documentary about childcare safety and parent advocacy. The filmmaker wanted to know how I'd found the strength to fight the system, to push forward when the school, the police, even some family members had suggested I was overreacting. I didn't feel strong, I told her honestly. I felt terrified. But I knew that if I didn't protect my daughter, no one else would. The system failed her. The school failed her. So I had to become the system that worked. The documentary aired on a major network and sparked nationwide conversations about childcare oversight, mandatory reporting, and the need for surveillance in facilities serving young children. Legislators in multiple states introduced bills requiring cameras in all licensed childcare facilities. Some passed, some didn't, but the conversation itself was progress. Lily is 7 now. She's thriving in elementary school, has friends, loves reading and art. She still sees Dr. Fletcher occasionally when she needs to process difficult feelings, but mostly she's a normal, happy kid. She doesn't remember everything that happened at Sunshine Academy, which her therapist says is both a blessing and a natural result of childhood trauma processing. Sometimes I think about that moment in the parking lot when I first saw the bruise on her arm. I think about how easily I could have believed the school's explanations, how many parents did believe them, how Miss Deborah might still be teaching if I'd just accepted "it must have happened at home" as an answer. I think about the hidden camera in Lily's backpack and how that decision to record could have backfired legally, could have gotten us in trouble instead of her abuser. I think about how close we came to the video being excluded, to the case collapsing, to Miss Deborah walking free. Mostly, I think about how far I was willing to go, installing hidden cameras, filing police reports, hiring lawyers, sitting through every minute of that trial reliving my daughter's trauma. I would have gone further if needed. I would have done anything, risked anything, to protect my child and get justice for what was done to her. That's the answer to the question people ask when they hear our story. How far will you go for your child? As far as necessary. Further than I knew I could. As far as it takes. Because she's my daughter, and protecting her isn't optional. It's everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.